Hello. I was a Jewish believer in Jesus for 42 years. I came to faith at the young age of just 18 years of age. During that time, I'm very sorry to say, um, I was sexually assaulted by a Church of England vicar who was visiting me on my home at my request to do some voluntary work or something, and I just somebody said this is the fellow that will be able to help you, or he has contacts. This chap used to be a missionary for the Jews. He knew I was Jewish because that was mentioned on the phone. He would know. We are talking decades ago. There were in those days very few Jewish believers in Jesus. And he came to my home, and he said, "Oh, I'm passing. I can call in." When he arrived, the first thing I noticed was how aggressive he was. He looked innocuous as I saw him then in decades ago. He looked harmless, um, and his manner was very, very aggressive and very controlling. So I thought, oh dear. And so I invited him into my lounge, and I immediately got a sense. It's an awful thing. I just got this sense of evil, this sense of, it's the only word I can think of, this bad vibe from it. I felt something really bad vibe from it. And I thought, well, I'm not offering him a cup of tea or anything. So all during the conversation, he's very abrupt, aggressive, and I could see this is not a very unpleasant man, and I've got to get rid of him as soon as I can. So as we're walking to the door, right, I remember that. Could you remember this? I'll never forget this. I'm on the left, he's on the right, and then he pounced. Now I can't remember. This is. I can't quite remember how long it lasted, or exactly what he did. Well, I was just totally smothered. Like a lot of women, I thought if I was sexually assaulted, I'd fight back, but I didn't. What happened? I just froze. I just don't remember. All I remember is being smothered and just like feeling like I'm being consumed. Something is overwhelming me and consuming me. Um, and and then suddenly, I don't know how long it lasted. I don't know what was going. I don't know how long it lasted. You see. Then it suddenly stopped, and he suddenly left, and then I started shaking, and all I could think about all I could think about at this time was his wife and his children. That's all I could think about. I knew he was married and had children. Like I wasn't thinking straight. I was thinking, his poor wife, his children. Well, if I go to the police, it's going to devastate the children's life and the wife's life. And all I was doing was thinking about the wife and children. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but that's the way I was. I'm embarrassed to say. That's the way I was thinking. Oh, his poor wife. His poor wife. His poor children. I didn't tell anybody from the church because I'd been long enough in the church to know that they always take the side, Christianity always takes the side of the perpetrator and it attacks the victim. It always wants you to be sympathetic to the perpetrator. So it doesn't matter what's gone in your life, what terrible things have happened to you, they always take the perpetrator's side. And they want you to be sympathetic to the perpetrator. And then they attack you indirectly through saying you must forgive. And you don't seem very forgiving, or you mustn't be angry, or this is very unChrist-like response. Christ wouldn't respond like this, would he? Well, I don't know how he'd respond if somebody pushed his dick up his arse. Maybe he has, I don't know how he'd respond, but apparently he's supposed to take it in good grace. I mean, this is what they're saying. And I'm sorry I'm laughing, but it's kind of black humour coming out here, isn't it? You can see I'm Jewish. But this is what they're saying, you know, it's like, and I knew they wouldn't believe me. They wouldn't want to believe me. This is it. They wouldn't want to believe me. I think deep down they would know I was telling the truth. Deep down they would know I was telling the truth. They would know it, but they would deny it. And they'd push it under the carpet and they would start attacking me. You must forgive him. He was... They would also say something like, oh, I'm sure he was just showing the love of Christ to you. He was just showing the love of Christ. And you misunderstood him. That's what they, that's the kind of, that's what they're like. That's the kind of statement that they would come out with. I knew that. I know what they're like because I've lived with them. And I thought there's no point going to them because they won't do anything. Now, I also didn't go to the police because I also thought they're not going to believe me. This is a vicar. This is decades ago. And in those days, the church was... people didn't suspect anything that a clergyman would do anything like that. And they would take his side. He was very clever, very manipulative, very cunning. And at the end of the day, it's a he said, she said situation. But I was very, very... I think I was in shock, and then the effect went on for decades, and even now it sort of still affects me. And it's simply because he I think it's about the fact that I was targeted. He knew I was Jewish, and he was an ex-missionary to the Jews. Now, I told a Christian girl a couple of years later, this shows you the Christian mindset. This woman was in her 30s, she'd had a few men, she'd more than a few men, she knew what the world was about. I told her, and she said, don't say that about him, he's a man of God. So she's taking his side and reprimanding me for even mentioning it. Because my concern from that day on was, what if he does this again? What if he does this again? What if he does it for a younger girl? What I wouldn't have him near my children? What would he do with a young teenage girl? And it bothered me and bothered me. And then after 6 months, I wanted to go to the police. But again, you know, I'm thinking, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to believe me. I've wanted over the decades to write to his past employer and tell them this organisation that he worked for, because they write articles and he's being praised, this great missionary to the Jews, and I just want to tell them, but I know there's no point, because I know how they think, and I know Jewish believers will be exactly the same. They know it's wrong, sexual assault, they know it'd be wrong to sexually assault me, but they are torn. The first thing they're thinking is forgiveness. They're not interested in how I am. It's the forgiveness. You must forgive. You must forgive. And then they're taking the side of the perpetrator, wanting you to be sympathetic. Then they say you're exaggerating, you've misunderstood him. He's probably showing the love of Christ. He probably sees you as a daughter. He was being affectionate. You've misunderstood. This is how they are. They're just in denial. And I wanted to write and tell them, but I knew they would respond the same way, because that is the nature of Christianity. And also they would have to hide it, because the last thing they want is for the Jewish community to find out that one of their own is being sexually assaulted by a vicar, by an ex-missionary. So they're going to shove that under the carpet. Now, a number of years ago, I saw an article they'd written, and he was smiling there, and I was so furious because I'd assumed he'd died, and I thought, he's still there. And I got in touch with the Church of England, and I told them, the lady, and they referred me that when there's been a past sexual assault, what they do is they refer you to the diocese, the area that you lived in when the assault took place. Now, the area where I lived in was managed by a man, some bishop or something. He was off sick, so there was another man dealing with his workload. Now, this is where they've got no seichel, the church. They're referring me to a man. This is sexual assault that I'm reporting. And they're referring me to a man, to talk to a man. I don't want to tell a man. You know, I don't want to be talking to a man. So this man gets in touch, and it's very much his wanting to come alongside me, to counsel me, and it was very well meaning, but that frightened me. I think it is because it's a man, and I'm thinking, I don't want a man starting getting involved with all this that's happened to me. He wanted me to go to the police. But again, it's a he said situation, and I told him that there's no point going to the police because it's a he said, she said. I've got no proof. I said, I just thought the Church of England should know. You ought to know what goes on in your church, and I thought, I'm going to let you know what goes on in your church. This happened to me. You need to be aware of it. I did eventually get another email where I was told at the moment, at the time, this is not that long ago, a few years ago, the Church of England is inundated with past allegations of sexual abuse. And they're so inundated they can't cope. They can't cope. The Church of England cannot cope with a backload of work of people reporting past cases of sexual abuse. And they'll also have present cases as well coming in. The Church of England now has decided they are not interested in past sexual assaults done to adults. I mean, the email's all gone now, you know, deleted everything. But they were saying they are only interested in past sexual abuse to children, not to adults. Now, my first thought was, what about people with learning difficulties? What about people with severe mental health problems? That, you know, but they have decided, because they've suddenly realised they can't cope with all this work, so we'll deal with the past cases of children sex abuse, but we won't deal, and we're not interested. In the words were, we're not interested in past cases of sexual abuse because I was over the age of 18. They're not interested. And those were the words, they're not interested. They're concentrating on obviously they're right. The past cases of child abuse do take, obviously, if they've got a lot of work on, they do take priority over me. I do understand that. But the point is, they don't seem interested to actually know what happened, and they don't seem interested. They don't seem like, thank you for telling us. We are so glad you've told us this and that you've made us aware of this, and you know, blah 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 blah. That is not the reaction I got. And I don't trust the Church of England. I would trust a politician more than I would trust the clergy. I just don't trust them. I don't trust them an inch. I did feel that this man was, although he had good intentions, you know, going to the police, I felt that the Church of England might use me as a poster girl, as somebody that they could say, look, we're doing everything to stop child, you know, sex abuse in the church and all that. And I just felt, no, I don't want that. I don't want to be in the Daily Mail. I don't, you know, I don't want to be used. I just felt they'd use me. I don't trust them. But it still bothers me. And I sort of, I have over the years tried to keep track of this fellow. He eventually died. And so what's left is his wife and his children. And you see, what is so awful about this, and what upsets me, is that I know that everything's pushed under the carpet. And I also know that even Jewish believers in Jesus, even though they know it's wrong, because of their devotion to Jesus and to Christianity, which is now they've taken it on board, the Christian faith, their duty is to the church. This is what's so awful. And, you know, when it comes down to it, the church is that's where it is. And this is what upsets me. And the fact that they would push everything under the carpet. And you know they're not going to do anything about it. They're frightened. It mustn't let the Jewish community know. And I think this, you know. Now, having reflected on that sexual assault, obviously as I'm much older now, over the years, and what I've realised that sexual assault was very much symbolic of the church's persecution, domination of the Jew over the centuries, in trying to get them to believe in Jesus, in trying to control them. We're going to make this Jew believe in Jesus. We're going to make it bow down to our Jesus. We are going to stop them believing in their Torah given by God. We're going to stop them being Jewish. We are going to get them Christianized, right? And this sexual assault to me is such a visual demonstration, a visual image of that pouncing, controlling, consuming. The intention was to penetrate that Jew, control. A sexual assault and a rape, attempted rape, is all about violence. It's not about sex. Everybody knows this. It's about control and violence. And I was targeted, and he deliberately was aiming to penetrate me, get inside that Jew, control, dominate that Jew. It's going to be under his thumb. He is the minister of the church, and he's going to have that Jew. It's almost like a conquest, you know, in war, you know, where in war, so often they still do, they go in there and they rape the women, because that is the conquest. That's the fruits of winning the war. Let's go in and penetrate that woman. Let's penetrate that Jew, and we have control of her. She is now controlled by me, you know, by the church. And this is, to me, that to me is a symbolism of it. And what's the point of telling you all this? I don't know. But this goes on. This thing goes on. And don't tell me he wasn't a Christian, because this is what Christians say. Christians do wrong. Oh no, they weren't a Christian, they weren't born again, they weren't full of the Holy Spirit. He was a Christian. He worked as a missionary. He was an ordained minister. Very highly respected. Round the world, very well known. But this is what goes on. And I think it damaged me more than I realised at the time. I think I was probably in shock of it. I think it's as I was getting older and older and more mature, you know, suddenly realising the implications of this assault and all that it meant. And I don't feel any hatred towards him. And I wouldn't want him, you know, if there is a hell, I wouldn't want him to go to hell. But somebody like that would not have a conscience. Somebody like that, you know, the predators. And what is so awful is that I probably was not the first. When he assaulted me, he was middle-aged. That will have not been the first attack. I realise that now. He would have done this before. And he might well have done this during the time he was a missionary to the Jews. This is another thing. So you've got vulnerable Jews, and there are, you know, like, and anybody else vulnerable. You've got people in all sorts of circumstances, women, young women, teenagers, teenage girls, vulnerable for all sorts of reasons. This is what's so awful. And my biggest regret is that not going to the police immediately. And I would say possibly what you can learn from this video is, if something like this happens to you, first of all, don't go to the church. Don't tell anybody from the church. What you must do, I would advise you, is go to the police. It's very important to go to the police because they need to be aware of these predators in the community, because it could be they know other things about this person that obviously you don't know. They might have heard rumours about that person, and then you come in and tell them what's happened to you, and they say, ah, they're getting a little bit more information. And this is very important, particularly in case of there's another sexual assault happens somewhere. Then they've got somebody to go and interview because they've got information. They've already had a report of somebody being sexually assaulted, but I didn't realise all that at the time because of the state I was in. I wasn't thinking clearly. But now, obviously, the older I've got, the more I can see these things, and I would say you must do the same. But don't go to the church. You must not do that, because they will try and prevent you from going to the police. They will also, I don't think, help you in terms of coping with it, because their main concern will be getting you to forgive the person. That's not the issue. The whole business of forgiveness comes much, much later. What matters is your well-being in the present and everything else, how you are. The things of, if you're going to, forgiving, all that's a process, and everybody, has to work all this over a period of time, and you're going through different stages, and anger, resentment, rage. There's all sorts of things, but that is normal. That is normal. And what I would say is go to the police and go to an outside source, a non-Christian place, like Rape Crisis or something like that, I don't know, where you're going to get very sound common sense support, where you're not going to be made feel worse than you already are. Some people, when awful things like that happen, can't forgive the person. And if you're in that position and you tell the church, they're just going to be at you, and they're going to make you feel bad, and it's going to escalate things. So if anything like this happens to you, go to the police, and they need this information. They need the information, because you could prevent it happening to somebody else. And that itself will at least give you some peace of mind, which I haven't got now because I didn't do it. And I'm very embarrassed and I'm very ashamed of it. But you must go to the police.